Hi everyone, my name is Eve. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new. Today we are looking at some creature feature horror book recommendations. Creature feature is not the subgenre of horror that I sort of steer towards as my first choice when I fancy reading a horror book, but once I do get to them, finding some interesting ones that I think are worth mentioning. But because I've not read that many, I have compiled a small list of 5 books to just talk about any creature feature, a horror type of story. And I'm hoping that in the future I might be able to make some separate list of vampire, zombie, witch, mermaid, whatever, horror. So we'll see what happens with that idea. But for now, let's talk about the 5 books. One I have to recommend is one that I actually read, I think it was like 7 years ago, and I haven't reread it since. So I'm very vague in memory about this book, but I do remember enjoying it for the most part, and that is Survive the Night by Daniel Vega. I feel like now that Riley Sager's book has been out for a little while, the title is probably everyone's gonna associate it with the Riley Sager book, I mean, so this is kind of pushed aside, but this is a book about Casey, who she's fresh out of rehab, substance abuse problems, as a kind of a privileged teenager. She ends up at the Survive the Night underground rave party at this abandoned subway station with her friends and her ex-boyfriend. And I mean, fresh out of rehab, drugs, alcohol, flashing lights, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. And it only gets worse when Casey stumbles onto one of her friends' mangled body, because they all thought she went off to just make out with some guy or something, but she's completely mutilated. So they of course panic, and then when they go back to where the party was, everyone's gone, and all the exits, everything is just completely shut off, and they're stuck at this abandoned underground station, and they're being hunted by someone or something, as the synopsis kind of lays out for us. And I do remember that we go in expecting first to just be like a bit of a slasher, just some creep is kind of targeting them in the beginning anyway, but it becomes clear very soon that that is not the case. And this also has yet another twist at the end, which I'm definitely not going to spoil that. I'm just going to say does kind of change how you perceive some things, but as far as the book goes, as you read it and as you take it in, it's some weird, unspecified, monstrous creature with tentacles. Because you love that imagery, don't you? Uh, Essentially hunting these teenagers, young adults for sport. And again, because it is YA, I would say it is definitely a very juvenile type of YA. So for people who don't really read about teenagers who feel like teenagers, because there's YA that feels a bit more mature, I would say it's probably not for you. But if you're just looking for something super light, super popcorny, I mean, this is, how long is this? I'm just checking for you guys now. This is like 260 something pages, so it's quite easy to get through. I think when I read it, it took me like one sitting, a few hours. And I will say that I really find the cover quite cool. I mean, you can tell how long I've had it since it's all yellow here, but yeah, I would recommend this one if you're going not expecting something that takes itself too seriously. It's just a fun, popcorny type of read. This one is part of the Red Eye series, which is a YA anthology horror. So you have different authors writing all different types and subgenres of horror, and they're just, the covers are just stylized similar, so you could tell that they're part of the same series. And I think that is a great addition to the YA horror genre. That's actually how I started reading horror in general, from what I remember, not counting Stephen King. But anyway, this is A Whiteout by Gabriel Dillon, and this is a twist on vampires. So we have Charlie, who is not having a good home life, and he goes to his school ski trip that they organized with all of his classmates, just as a bit of an escape, to not have to think about what is happening back home. And they're essentially having a nice time, but then things quickly take a turn once the long night sets in and they start getting attacked by these vampiric creatures who are out for their blood. And I read this during lockdown number 1, I think, back in 2020. And like I said, it's very blurry in my mind. I mean, it has been 3 years, but I do remember that although this is YA, and some characters show it in the way that they talk and how they act, this is actually quite gory and quite tense because we have this giant ensemble cast of characters. So I would say if you're looking to get attached to quite a few of these characters, then you're going to be heartbroken, disappointed, however you want to phrase it, because this book doesn't shy away from picking off people. Like I said, we start with like an ensemble cast of like 20 plus people, and they just start going. I mean, I'm not obviously going to spoil it, and frankly, I don't really remember how many people exactly go, but they go and it's brutal, and they don't shy away from describing the details. So yeah, it's definitely not extreme body horror or anything, but there is gore here, so just bear that in mind. But I found that a bit of an interesting twist on the whole vampire thing. Like I said, I'm passionate about finding vampire books that are going to scare me or at least creep me out. So I would say this is a valuable addition to the subgenre. On the topic of vampires, I have what I'm sure you will probably recognize from me talking about it in my book haul and my wrap up, and that is Grady Hendrix's The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So this book is about Patricia, who is essentially a bored housewife. They live in a suburban town. Her kids are teenagers. She's just basically looking for something to entertain herself. And she finds this book club with the neighborhood women, except they end up talking about a lot of true crime there, and it becomes a bit of a solace for her, I should say, rather than just a book club, just something that is only hers. And one night she walks home from this book club and she just gets attacked by this elderly woman completely unprovoked, and this woman ends up dying on her property. And being the kind of a moral, upstanding person that she is, she goes to express her condolences to that elderly lady's nephew, and this guy just sort of starts inserting himself into Patricia's life and kind of taking everything away from her that was important in a very subtle way. And on top of that, children in the neighborhood just start going missing, and Patricia starts suspecting that this guy is not just a weirdo, but a bit of a fanged weirdo, I should say. And if you would like more detail what I thought about this book overall, because I had some qualms with it, you can check out my wrap up. But as far as the vampire aspect goes, again, I thought it was an interesting, not necessarily a twist, because it does play what we expect from vampires, kind of straightforward in terms of tropes. But it was definitely creepy once it allowed itself to be creepy, because we know that Grady Hendrix is the type of horror writer that does have comedy in his stories, a bit of campiness, but he's also not afraid to actually be creepy when it's relevant, when it's warranted. So there are definitely some genuinely scary moments in this book, and I would still definitely recommend it to people who are looking for more of a vampire type of thing. So yeah, I still rate it at 3.5, if that is any indication. Next book in our list is actually a bit of a, not a subversion per se, but maybe just a different kind of creature feature, because our main characters are the monsters of the story, and I am talking about This Delicious Death by Kayla Cunningham. And this is a YA horror where we follow four girls on their graduate trip to this music festival, but there is a big but here. A few years before this point, this infection sort of ran through the world where teenagers, adults, children, they got this, what was called the Halloween, and they essentially became flesh-eating ghouls. And for the government to kind of assimilate them back into society, the scientists came up with this synthetic human meat to sort their cravings out, which then allowed them to go back to their families. And our main character, she lives with her parents, but they're not really accepting of this development. So her friends are basically her family, which is why she feels so threatened when at this music festival, one of her friends ends up murdering this random guy, even though they have all the synthetic meat and they shouldn't need to do that, but she seems to lose control. And things only escalate once she realizes that they're being targeted by someone. All the ghouls at this event are being targeted by someone. And this was such a fun ride, such a, again, I keep using this phrase, but it's accurate, such a popcorny YA queer horror. I mean, the relationship portrayed here was lovely. Kind of a bit of a romance in the midst of all the craziness that's happening. It wasn't too creepy, I wouldn't say, in the sense of kind of those shivers down your spine. It definitely was gross. And I found the whole origin story of this virus infection thing quite interesting, and I almost wish that we got more of that. But yeah, I thought this was really fun, and it's a nice twist, nice spin on the whole monster creature thing in horror. So I would definitely recommend it even if you don't read much YA. The last book on this list is definitely a bit of a slow burn, and it's probably not going to be for everyone. Like I said in my December wrap up, I have kind of mixed opinions and feelings about this book at the time that I read it, and that is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. I can never remember exactly, but this follows an expedition where essentially this entertainment company, they're kind of meant to be like fictionalized mythbusters, and they descend into the Mariana Trench to find out if mermaids are real, and that expedition gets attacked, and some footage comes out that a lot of people think it's a hoax, some people think that it's real, but essentially they were attacked by what looked like mermaids. And I think it's 7 years later that a follow-up expedition is assembled with our main character being a sister of one of the deceased people, and they just want to find out the truth, and they want to actually succeed in proving or disproving once and for all that mermaids are real. And like I said in my wrap up, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but I will tell you now that if you're expecting something really fast-paced, just sort of snappy, like, no, this is not that sort of book. This is a book that talks a lot about the social, environmental commentary of quite a few things, such as different species assimilating, predators versus their prey. There's a lot to think about here, and I do think that was the author's goal, to make us think about that stuff, but it seeps into the book in lots of talking and discussing, and not a lot of action actually happens until like a good halfway into the book. So you have to be in the right mood for this one, and I wasn't. Hence why, like I said, I gave it a soft 4 stars for everything that I would have loved about it if I was in the right mood reading it. But anyway, I would still recommend it if you know what you're getting yourself into. And I will say that if someone doesn't like sci-fi, then this is probably not for you, because I'm not big on sci-fi, but I sort of let it slide because I do love some mermaids. But if you're really not into sci-fi at all, then again, probably don't pick this one up, because it goes a lot more into the whole scientific aspect than you'd expect. And I know that's not for everyone, and some people might find it a bit boring. So I'm just saying that they go very deep into it. Haha, pun not intended this time. And if you're looking for something that you might have to sort of not slog through, but like really sort of, you can't really skim through it, yeah, this might not be for you. But I would still recommend it to those who find this all interesting. And that is it. This little mini recommendations list. Like I said, I hope that it continues to grow in the future. But in the meantime, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment if you've read any of these, if you have any that you would like to recommend based on what I talked about here. I'm always looking to new recommendations. And I hope to see you next time. Bye.